Welcome to the Glad You Knew Politics Show. I'm Reese Ryan, and here with me as usual is Nathan Ang. This week's episode, we're excited to kickstart a new series where we speak with up-and-coming leaders in their field.
This week, we speak to Monique Purcell, who is a Bachelor of Commerce and Global Studies student at Monash University. We speak about how economics and business interconnect with climate change and how this relationship can be used to benefit climate change. Monique also tells us what she would do if she were running the country and some fashion tips to empower ourselves in the battle against climate change.
So, let's get stuck in with this week's guest, Monique Purcell. Monique, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic. When Nathan first told me we were bringing in a curly, intelligent redhead, I thought, oh, wow, we're bringing in Jess Glynn. But no, we have upgraded by bringing yourself in. But what inspired you to study politics and economics as well? Two birds with one stone, almost.
Yeah, I think they go really well hand in hand. I think what really was my driving force was the impacts on everyday life that big decisions have and flow-on effects from that. That's really what I suppose is a bit of a passion area of how a decision at a government level will affect a low-income family, living in the suburbs.
So was it a parent or was there a teacher that captured your imagination or inspired you with politics to learn more?
Oh, I did have a very interesting legal studies teacher who kind of created that frantic, there's so much going on, I suppose, and how it's all interconnected. But to get into the studying, I think it was more so just watching the news and watching how things unfold and general curiosity of how that all works.
Well, that's just an inquisitive mind you have there, and a great high school teacher.
A bit chaotic, but I loved it.
You also studied overseas as well. Where'd you get to?
I've done 3 stints overseas for my uni. I have been to Italy twice. And I did a semester at the University of Vienna. And I find it just so fascinating going overseas, meeting new people, finding out about their lives, their opinions, making friends from all over the place. And those are connections that you can really rely on for the rest of your life. So it's quite important and quite interesting.
Absolutely. And I think you'll be very familiar with all the immigration and paperwork of and seeing all the embassies and consulates to get a visa.
Oh my gosh. Visas? My visa to get to Austria and to study there did my head in, was a bit convoluted, a bit interesting to say the least.
So the hills weren't alive in Austria, is that what you're trying to tell us?
Oh my.
With your visa situation?
I think, it gets a bit confusing when you're dealing with a visa to stay in one country in a area that has visa-free travel for Australians. And so it's where can I go? Where can I not go? If I'm in Austria for 6 months, can I be in Italy for the next 3? And that whole grey area of how visas work is a bit confusing, but worked out in the end.
As Nathan, you've also studied overseas and abroad like Monique. What do you think is the best part about going overseas and actually studying compared to going on a trip? When you're studying something that you love and you meet people have a different ideal and vision and beliefs compared to yourselves.
I think it's the people you meet, actually. You can always travel, you can always go to see new places, do new things, eat new food, but I think rarely do you get the chance to be able to meet so many people, and there's a reason for you to meet people, you're all there, it's pretty natural, you all kind of feel in this together. I'm sure Monique has felt the same way, where you met
definitely
people from other places around the world that have come together, has picked this specific university to study yet, and you're all going, why did I choose to come here?
You face the challenges together and exploring together.
No, absolutely. And yeah, it's just, I think, like Monique said, the people, you kind of know that you can, firstly, you have a friend all around the world, and you can count on them, and you try to stay in contact with them. And I think that one of the best things is when you go traveling, you always know that you have someone or some friend in every corner of the globe, and you can you won't
Yes.
feel as alone. And so especially, I think now in the world with jobs, you I think you travel a bit more, you get posted at different places, so I think it's all very helpful.
Most definitely. I have a friend in northern Italy. When I left, he was like, "Oh, just remember, you're coming to my hometown. Like in the near future, you have to come, and we're making aperols." And like that's just something I don't think you get in any other situation.
It really is just the best. I know Nathan's uncle's adopted me, so here we go. It's beautiful being adopted. But we love to hear from what you've been studying recently, and rumor has it that you've been looking in depth to climate change recently with one of your projects. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing
Yeah.
at university?
Yeah, currently we are looking at the economics of climate change. And so, first starting off at looking at the science, the skepticism, but then policy and how to deal with it in a business sense. Because, yes, it has heaps of social implications, but looking at how things are going on in the world, to make tangible changes and tangible improvements, sometimes the best way to go about it is through business and economics and figuring out solutions in that sense.
So are you saying the market's going to guide us into a
Well,
more environmentally friendly future?
that's a bit of a big if, unless there is a bit of leadership in that round, especially with how countries are currently dealing, or more importantly, not dealing with climate issues. But I think one of the best ways is carbon taxes and internalizing costs of environmental climate change to create those important changes that are needed and deal with it effectively, efficiently, all that sort of thing.
I would love to hear what a carbon tax is, because I remember Nathan and I speaking about this, I think a couple of months ago, and basically, wasn't it Tony Abbott won his election because he stifled Julia Gillard's carbon tax?
Yeah, we did have the carbon tax here, and I think the carbon tax is probably one of the most effective ways to help limit carbon emissions and try to reduce them. But unfortunately, there was a big, I think, scare campaign around the word tax. It was a big carbon tax, and I think the media here especially worked very hard to create this atmosphere of fear around the word tax. And so eventually it got replaced when, yeah, like you said, Tony Abbott came into power.
Yeah. When you look at how the carbon tax works and how it works globally, it's quite interesting with economics background, is that basically you look at, there's different models that find optimal carbon pricing. And basically that is charging certain amount per ton of carbon emitted. Some models estimate that being between, well, around about 70 US per ton, which is significant. And you actually do see that playing out globally, not really in Australia, but Finland is one of the countries charging about 77 US. And then the EU uses a similar system of charging per carbon ton through pollution permits, which are also an interesting way of doing carbon pricing. And yeah, so attaching that price means that companies need to be aware of how much they are producing, how much they then can feasibly produce with their cost structures. And so that's just a way to cut down carbon emissions and also force people to look for solutions and alternatives that mean that they are producing less, so they're not using that expenditure into putting carbon out into the atmosphere, which is evidently screwing up a lot of things.
Do you think we as a society, and especially young people, we almost have a social responsibility here to understand how we're polluting the world. Is that something that comes up when you're in your classes? Is that people feel that sense or that sensibility to actually educate others, and do you do that with your friends?
Oh, absolutely. There is definitely been a movement for the younger people to get involved, and we're talking Greta Thunberg type generation going out there and speaking about climate change and the effects it's going to have on us. Because what we're looking at is, yes, for the politicians who are all 50s plus, these issues might not be their biggest in their lives. In our lives, us being in our 20s, this is going to affect us for years to come. And if we are proactive in finding solutions and addressing it now, we're going to face very big issues. And so, yeah, it's definitely a conversation my friends have all the time, from looking at even environmentally friendly products to use to where you put what super you have or who they're investing in. There's been big movement for younger generation to actually look at where their super is investing and finding ones that align better with their beliefs and concerns over the climate.
Isn't it weird that we talk about Greta Thunberg as kind of that generation, but it feels like it was us a couple years
Nathan
ago.
was
But now,
too involved with One Direction at 15.
Yeah.
The climate change. She's amazing.
it just feels especially strange, especially when you talk about it then, like you said, when you talked about Greta Thunberg as that generation, I was like, oh, I guess we're not part of that generation anymore.
Yeah, far younger people are getting involved, and it's becoming far less, not so much a taboo. I don't think it was ever a taboo, but more of an open conversation between generations, and less, I suppose, that idea that the younger kids don't know what they're talking about. It's more so they might have input on what will impact their life for the next 50, 60, 70, 80 years.
Is it easier in politics, and this is a broad question, but is it easier to almost be a climate denier?
If you're looking at, say, in Australia's context, our biggest contributors to a lot of our export trade is all mining. We have the coal, we have the iron ore. And to say that when they contribute so much to economic growth and are a big focus of our economy, to have that little backpedal of even I believe there was a statement by our Prime Minister saying that we want to have a strong economy and a good environment. I think the environment had to come after our economy. And so denying the massive impact it's going to have on our lives definitely can aid that economic interest a lot of them seem to have.
Yeah, because I've been looking into Scott Morrison's advisory commission lately, and you wouldn't be surprised to see Nev Powell is running that commission or advisory board, and works for a gas company.
It's quite skewed where we have a lot of our politics in Australia with our big polluters, which is not ideal.
Are you concerned though, because they say clean gas and clean coal is what Scott Morrison pumps out in his messaging, but is there a concern that if we do go down this fossil fuel route, I think we're one of the leads in we're making more oil than Qatar at the moment. Is it frightening that if we do go down the fossil fuel route, that we'll forget about the invaluable way of renewable energy?
Oh, absolutely. If we're just steaming ahead through emissions and little interest in changing, one, that's stifling any innovation in the industry. Like, you can make moves to better energy and it's better for the environment. It might hurt, well, it will hurt those industries, but it's transitioning into better industries. If you look at countries like, I think it's Denmark, they've now, their main forms of energy is wind and bioenergy, where they literally are burning like biodegradable product to make their energy instead of coal. And they've completely transitioned. Like, they've gone into this. It's possible. But for some reason, Australia has decided that, no, we're sticking where the money is for now. And I think that's very present thinking. If you're thinking about your economy right in this second, what industry is doing right now, you lose that chance of moving forward and really progressing, becoming a leader in any other sense if you're stuck where you are.
And I think it's with Norway, or I'm not sure if it's Norway or one of the Nordic countries, where we kind of praise them for their clean climate energy efforts, but at the same time, I think similar to Australia in a way where these kind of rich countries, they're only able to do this is because they themselves export a lot of oil as well, I think Norway, and so it's off the back of that. But in that case, I think at least they're doing something good with the money they're getting, and the wealth that they're accruing. But in Australia, it seems that we are accruing wealth through our natural resources and whatnot, but we're not actually making any progress or steps forward to maybe transition away.
Yeah, absolutely. When we're getting this money in and then you're not investing it, like, it's like not diversifying your interests. You're like, this works, I'm going to stick with this. But soon it will go out of fashion. You already see there's massive push from like the younger generation, as we were just talking about transitioning out of that. And I think there's a big concern over as our generation ages and we get to be the ones in politics, in government, and as maybe political parties change, if we have a more focus on green energy, we're going to be steps behind. And I think that's a big fear at the moment.
I think one of the, I guess, concerns about transitioning to, clean energy and as you said, like Norway, they've done it, but I think some of the concerns I've read about in Australia specifically that relates to Australia is that it's not as reliable yet, and I'm not a total expert on this, and I'm not sure, and I think as young people and people who believe in climate changes as this existential threat to all of us, and we can have this push to say that yes, we have to do it, and obviously we do have to do it, but I feel like we should also enrich the conversation by giving suggestions and steps we can go there. So like, not just saying we have to do it, but let's say, let's research and let's learn more, let's study, let's talk about how do we do it and how do we make clean energy more reliable because of different volumes during the day, or maybe during summer, during the day, everyone's putting the AC on and using so much power, but at night cools off and it goes back down. And how do we, conversations around about how do we manage this? How do we make sure that we always have power, isn't it? And we're not, I think so. That's, I think, maybe the current argument on why we are still burning natural gases, or I'm not sure what we're doing, but it's obviously not good, but but I think we're doing it still is because it has the capacity to fit and to scale depending on our usage.
Yeah, that's definitely a concern, and was one that I remember, I think it would be about 3 years ago in South Australia. There was that massive power outage that happened during one of the heat waves, and there was a massive outcry that it was because they used wind farms, and it was the wind farms' fault. It wasn't reliable energy. But then in the coming days, it was revealed that they have a backup supply, backup generator for the entire state. They had another supply of energy to come through, and it was human error. They just needed to flick a switch and send that energy into the grid, but they didn't. There was a bit of faltering on that, and so that's why they came to that power outage, because they just didn't have that supply flowing through. That was a unique situation of much greater demand because of a heat wave. And so there was massive outcry that, oh no, like wind energy, it doesn't provide. And then it was like, actually, that was human fault. You just need to flick a switch, get that supply in. But there is that fear that if that's happened before, it could happen again. The idea that what if it was the wind energy, if it wasn't for not allowing that backup supply. And so, it's deeply ingrained, this fear of unknown, I suppose, as well. It's not something we've grown up with. We've always had coal. Coal is what we've grown up on, what our parents have grown up on. It's comfortable. You might think, yeah, it's bad for the environment, but we know it works. We've had years of it working. But if we're going into the future, it's something you need to be investing in those alternatives and making sure that, yes, they will work.
It feels like a strange allegiance to say that, oh, my family grew up on coal, my great-grandfather grew up on coal, so we're going to stick with coal because it's what we do traditionally.
It's a safety blanket. You tried and trusted, but there are alternatives out there. There are other ways forward for us to go.
I just hope we don't flick the switch off this conversation, really, for all our friends in South Australia. Yeah.
No more power for them.
But I'm also thinking of other movements of how we can improve our environment around us. Is this also through fast fashion, and what are other ways that we can showcase to our viewers of how they can feel empowered to act in their own daily lives?
Yeah, because that's something that's really been coming to the forefront in recent years, is that, yes, we know that most pollution is happening by big companies, and it can feel quite disempowering for an everyday human, like, oh, well, I can't close a coal plant. But things like consumer products are massive in changing the face of pollution. With the fashion industry currently, I believe it's one of I don't want to get this wrong, but I would say about the second biggest polluter in the world. It pollutes more than air travel and maritime travel. It is massive. With, I believe in Australia, fast fashion dumps about 60,000 kilos of landfill every 10 minutes. It's just outrageous the amount that fashion and fast fashion creates from being, I think, the second biggest user of world water. And it put the process of dyeing clothes and making clothes creates plastics in the ocean. And there's been a movement towards understanding where your clothes come from and choosing more sustainably sourced and produced fashion, and also investing into what is now being known as slow fashion. So products that are made ethically with responsibly sourced products in a dyeing process that uses lower amounts of water. And these are ways to not quickly, but effectively reduce the amount of pollution that is going out every 10 minutes in Australia. There's, I think, one of the most impressive things in recent years is, I'm not sure how well you guys are with Instagram, bather brands.
We're not 55, thanks, Monique.
Well, there has been blowing up on Instagram, on TikTok even, massively responsibly sourced and made. A lot of swimmers usually are in this field of being made from recycled plastics, or brands that upcycle clothes. And the movement also to people choosing to buy from op shops instead of fast fashion brands like Zaful or Boohoo that are dumping clothes all the time. And so there's been a massive movement, and it's a really simple way of just thinking about where you buy your clothes, how you use your clothes, the understanding that using your clothes another time, wearing that same pair of jeans before buying another pair. You don't need 7 pairs of jeans, and getting that message to people that maybe 2 pairs of jeans in your closet is all you need, when dyeing a pair of jeans uses so much water. And so things like that, where you just slow down fashion, slow down clothes, it actually has a massive impact on the environment.
Don't worry, you won't see me with my swimmers in the landfill, considering how white I am at the moment, and that's not due to ISO.
Gotta love that redhead life.
You know it.
And I was always under the impression 2 pairs of jeans was all you needed, so I think I was ahead of the curve.
Already on the game, I love it. But yeah, fast fashion is doing terrible things, and it's been called out of late. Like in the recent years, you are hearing fast fashion and it's getting its name dragged through the dirt, and it's brilliant to see from an environmental perspective.
But even then, I feel like the appeal of fast fashion is just so great because it's usually very cheap. It's like, I'm sure you've seen on like Instagram, big brands like Fashion Nova, where they get like, it's just they get all these influencers that wear their stuff, and it's so cheap, and you can only imagine that because it's so cheap, it's probably terrible quality. You wear it once and then you chuck it out, and then it's on to the next thing. And I think with buying ethically and buying environmentally ethical clothes that are produced properly and don't harm the environment as much, is that they're usually also pretty expensive.
Yes.
And so I think it's trying to bring down that price to a range where people feel comfortable buying these kind of brands and clothes regularly.
I didn't know you were a fashionista either, Nathan. Impressive.
He knows all about his clothes, got an extensive wardrobe.
No, he's saving the planet, Monique.
2 pairs of jeans. 2 pairs of jeans.
Oh, you need. But yeah, you raise a very important point there, that it's accessible. Fast fashion is accessible. It is cheap. It is quick. It's fast. It makes you trendy in no time. It has all the trends. I think I think it is Fashion Nova that releases something like 600 items a month to their range. So they're always on top of trends and making it seem like you can be trendy on a budget. And that is something that a lot of people face when they're thinking about more sustainable practices, is that it generally comes with a price tag. But something to remember is that there is other things than going to a really sustainable recycled plastic bathing store to get your clothing, is that there's rise of popularity in online stores like Depop. Not sure how familiar you are with Depop, or what's the other one?
I know. My sister's on it.
Yeah,
I don't shop there personally.
Oh, it's great. You can get some really cute like jumpers and jeans and tops, and it's like bringing a charity store to you. It's used clothing, so pre-loved, someone else's, and there's removing of that stigma of shopping at like a charity store to, it's become more trendy. If you've ever seen the whole indie girl aesthetic that has been, popularized in the past year, it's this idea of shopping at Savers, at Vinnie's, and it's like everywhere that it's now like, oh, it's cool. Like, this is a vintage jumper.
It's a bohemian look.
Exactly.
It's like you go to Coachella. Every time you leave the house, it's like you're going to Coachella.
Yes, and it's fantastic. So there's viewing that sustainability doesn't necessarily have to come with that price tag. And it's becoming trendy to go to pre-loved clothing and that vintage look. And it's great. It is a fantastic move forward. And there are influencers at the front of that. So as you said, a lot of influencers get paid big bucks by Fashion Nova and all that. And then we have influencers, once again, not sure on your pop culture choices. And if you know, like Emma Chamberlain, one of the massive influencer at the moment.
I've actually heard of her. I actually watched a couple of her videos before I went to Los Angeles. I was like, let's just see how she does things and
what the Cali life is like.
Pretty much.
But yeah. But in that sphere that is extremely popular, if you look at half of her content, it is vintage stores, it is Depop orders, it's things like that. And so it's popularizing this ethical, cheap, but making it so trendy, which is brilliant to see that will probably be the trend forward, is this movement towards more ethical choices.
But I've also seen on Facebook, there's like, I'm not sure if you've seen these kind of invites where it's like they invite you to these warehouse sale of vintage clothes.
Yeah.
But I question them because, number one, I see them quite a lot. and I've actually been to one of them, and they're not cheap either. Like, you go, and they're like $100 or $50, and I'm not sure how much these kind of clothes are going for, and so I think they also now this kind of vintage clothing they've obviously, like you have said, that there's an opportunity here.
Absolutely.
And I think there are definitely people taking advantage of this where they just mark up the price like tremendously, like not even here, like I think all around the world. Like I was just walking in New York and on this street where there was a lot of vintage clothing shop, and I was like, all right, vintage clothing. To me, that was like a hint for like secondhand clothes maybe, and it was secondhand clothes, but it was like really expensive stuff. It was like above 100 for everything. I'm like, wow. Is this vintage shopping? I mean, it's I guess more ethical, but I guess part of the allure of shopping is that you're wearing kind of the best clothes, the really trendy stuff, and usually the trendy stuff comes with a price tag. And so,
yes,
in a way, I'm not sure, but in a way, it's kind of good that it transitions a bigger demographic, maybe, of people that are kind of put off by, ooh, ew, secondhand clothes. I don't want to wear that, but now they see that, wow, it's actually pretty cool, right?
Yeah, definitely. And there's a bit of a concern for the people that do rely on charity shop clothing and rely on that, $4 t-shirt that you can get from your local Vinnies. And that as prices increase and as people do what is known as like thrift flips, where they get the clothes and then, might cut off the sleeves and add chains or whatever, bit of DIY to the things and then on-sell them, that some important stock to people that are most in need are going to be left out because it's no longer accessible. It's being pillaged by people making trendy choices. So there is definitely drawbacks, but if you can get a lot more movement away from fast fashion, there's pros and cons with any decision and any trend, I suppose.
I didn't realise the block had made its way to fashion as well with the DIY business.
Absolutely. You need to get on Depop and look at some of the things. People get like old jumpers and acid wash them and put hoops and chains, and it's quite interesting. But
I actually had a pretty good experience on Depop. I was looking for some new, those all white Air Force Ones, the Nikes, and I was like, and if you buy them new, it's like $150. But I went on Depop and I found this basically brand new one for like $50. And this girl actually sent me the shoes before I even paid her. So I was like, wow. You've never been on the internet before, because this is some pretty risky stuff you're doing.
Big trust there.
I did pay her, but I was like, wow, okay. She's like, I've posted it. You can send me the details to this bank account. I'm like, wow, okay.
Obviously keen to get rid of them.
I can't recommend Depop enough. It sounds pretty good to
no
me.
Complaints there.
Well, I'm going to transition out of this Depop love that's going down right now. And
a bit of a tangent.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll all go thrift shopping. Forget about Macklemore after ISO's all over. Nathan's quite excited.
Get some more Air Force
after
ones.
the amount I've never heard him talk about clothes so much. However, Monique, what would you love to see Australia do in terms of climate change in the next 10 years? What would be your vision if you were running the show here?
I was running the show. Ooh, alrighty. Definitely in the next 10 years, we were meant to be hitting the Paris Agreement targets by then. We're not at this point in time.
And wait, before you say Paris, and I think you're going to mention Kyoto as well,
mm-hmm.
I almost think this is a wonderful contiguous, but our listeners, they won't be sure what is Paris and Kyoto and these other agreements that Australia's signed.
So basically, the Reader's Digest version of this is that Australia is a signatory on many different environmental international agreements. So a bunch of countries come together, they all argue over who's doing the best job at saving the planet. Short answer is not a lot of them are doing much, but they come together and they set targets. The Paris Agreement was one, I believe, that was 2012-ish, around then. Obama was the president of the US. It was during his first term, I believe, as well, that they signed this.
Nathan, did we do an assignment on this in high
We
school?
did, I think we did.
I'm looking at you. You're
It's
going, Ree, say a number.
My goodness.
Very much a global politics for VC students will be familiar with it. But
Please comment in the comment section if you know the answer.
the trauma of global politics in high school, but
That's for another podcast.
oh man. But on that, so Paris Agreement is to keep, they set a target, I believe, of below 2 degrees warming. Different countries pledged different targets. Australia was to cut our emissions by 26 to 28% from our 2005 levels, something we have not done. We've seen no great change since our 2017 levels. We're plateaued. We are not doing better. Our predicted levels by the end of 2030, which is when we're meant to be hitting those Paris Agreement targets, nowhere near. Absolutely nowhere near, and actually worse off than the predictions they had made at the time of the agreement, which is tragic. And so that's the Paris Agreement. Before that, there was many iterations of different climate agreements between countries. One was Kyoto, so another time when world leaders met and talked about how they were going to save the world with very little follow-through, was the creation of Kyoto Protocol. And in that, one of the most infuriating parts, grinds my gears, this one, was Australia begged that we were a developing economy at the time of this. Yes. Because that makes absolute sense. And basically turned around and said, well, when developing, please help us out. Do not count our logging. Our logging is excluded. It's not a part of our emissions. And it's one of our biggest areas of emissions for Australia. And so the way that agreement was structured, Australia was actually able to increase our emissions by about 4%. For an agreement that was meant to cut our emissions, we ended up producing more.
But we're now plateauing, so actually some would say that we're not increasing anymore, so it's a good thing.
Yes, but then something that's really important to think about, and I don't think is common knowledge with climate change, is the way it works on a science level, and this is basic thing, is when we pollute, carbon goes into the air. We know this, all other, greenhouse gases. But the way that the world gets its temperature is radiation comes in radiation waves, and then it's meant to bounce on out. A bit of it is meant to stay. That is how we stay alive, and it's important. But as we increase those carbon levels, you increase what is known as like the carbon concentration in the air. Before Industrial Revolution, we were sitting at 280. Now we're sitting between 400 and 450. So in 300 years, we've increased greatly. And it's a real problem because that means that those gases trap that radiation in. And so if we plateau, it actually just increases the amount that stays, so from 1 year to the next, because it's trapping, it makes the effects worse. You actually need to be doing better, so lower and lower each year for that effect, because it compiles the effect. And that's the big issue, that staying the same has great issue. You have to be better than the year before, otherwise it gets worse. Not sure if that made too much sense.
No, it's just no longer bouncing. My understanding of it is that it's no longer bouncing, radiation before the Industrial Revolution, where the heat would come in and bounce right off, and some would seep through, and that's how we get heat. But now it's being trapped more, so the heat's no longer bouncing as much.
Yes, so more stays.
And just to be clear, I wasn't saying that plateauing before was a good thing. No, Australia's doing a terrible job. I think in the entire world, I'm not sure per person, per capita, whatnot, we are actually one of the worst, like one of the worst emitters in the world per person. Like we're just
Yes.
Not
Terrible.
that many people, Nave.
yeah, like we do not have as many people compared to the rest of the world, but per the rest of the world, per person, we are committing way more emissions than I think most other countries. We're like one of the worst.
From what I've read, I think there's a climate change performance index, and I'm pretty sure that is between 59 countries, and Australia is like 57. And amongst the G20, we are one of the lowest, if not the lowest, countries on it for per capita.
Lowest as in emissions or
in so the climate change performance index looks at emissions policy, energy use, and use of renewables. So it's an entire holistic view, I suppose, on how you deal with climate change and your impact. And we are right down the bottom.
I just wanted to make clear that being at the bottom and being lowest is a bad thing,
Yes.
not a good thing.
Yes, we do not want that, neither. Do better.
Because lowest sounds good. Sounds like, oh, we're committing the lowest emissions here. We're not doing,
We have some of the highest emissions, but worse performance, which is not fabulous.
Why doesn't this make the news, though? I still can't figure this out. Why doesn't this shock people or scare people or emotionally affect people?
Well, I think there might be a few factors to that Australia is just like, oh yeah, it's kind of that apathy towards it. They're like, yeah, things are happening as they should happen, or how there's that idea of climate change is cyclical, that this is just a cycle in the climate. And I feel like also a lot of academics or public policy kind of disregard it, not see it as the most important thing, so it's not on people's radar all the time. That fear-mongering, especially over the carbon policy a few years back, and just kind of instills that apathy towards the policy and apathy towards change. And because we don't see as many effects, I suppose, in Australia as some other countries, we're not one of the small island nations that are set to be underwater in 50 years. And so there's that sort of, it's not affecting us right now. Well, it is, but not to a great enough extent to really spark that change, I suppose. And that's an issue.
We should start mentioning there'll be more boat people coming along now that all these islands are going down, and there'll be climate change refugees. Yeah. And
which is quite a interesting situation politically for Australia if we do get a mass influx of climate refugees, because, well, of course, Australia's refugee policy, but also technically under UNHCR, there's no such thing as a climate refugee. The Refugee Convention does not list climate change or inability to live somewhere because of how the environment is.
It's an old document.
Yeah, it's from World War II, the outburst of that.
Why hasn't someone updated the Google Doc?
I know, right? It needs some editing. And yeah, so if we end up with climate refugees, we know Australia's policy towards refugees is, that's a great word for it.
Send them away to a place that's not Australia, but technically still Australia. It's like, we are Australia. Christmas Island is technically Australia, but also technically not Australia. So we're fulfilling our duties, but at the same time, not really.
Yeah, I'm also studying a whole massive part of my uni currently is on refugees and the discussion over climate refugees, and Australia has no capacity to deal with climate refugees. If people come to Australia for climate purposes under UNHCR, they're not refugees, and since Australia doesn't really treat refugees ethically, kindly, it will be a massive issue.
Seriously is a massive issue. I don't know if you both study something along the lines of Australia's complex with immigration, considering we've all come from somewhere. Like, that's the craziest part about all of this immigration chat.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, with just, most of the Australian population are immigrants. I think about 50% have a parent born overseas, the Australian population.
Well, Nathan's parents are born overseas. You're born overseas, Nate.
I'm born overseas, so. And I think
so many
I've also
people.
read that. I've also read that compared to the rest of the world, Australia has pretty good immigration views and values. But that's not to say that we can still improve, and that's why we're talking about it, right? Is that we still obviously have problems with refugees, people, asylum seekers, and I think, especially now in this period where you've got more kind of, I don't know if it's more, but it feels more prevalent that you have all this kind of nationalist parties where we have to protect ourselves from the other people that want to come here and steal our jobs and rot the system, and we have to have strong borders and
But
build a
Nate,
wall
what
somewhere.
what is good though compared to the rest of the world? Shouldn't you set a precedence compared to everyone else and not go, oh, but the rest of the world's horrible. Look at the UK with Nigel Farage, and they spin how immigration and what you said with the tropes that they're taking all our jobs, and if there's too many people, no one can get jobs.
I think they've been good with immigration, like I think maybe economic immigration, where they come here to have a better economic future. So they're not necessarily running away from a war-torn country or their country sinking. It's more so that we've been, I think, pretty good with. We've seen the benefit of having people migrate to Australia, and it's benefited our country, our economy. It's been very good in that sense, but on other topics of immigration, like refugees, obviously not great at all. But it's more of a, I only brought that up because it's more of a thought in relative terms. So it's not like a, pat on the back, we're doing such a great job now. It's more of a, just a thought I had to maybe contextualize how we're doing compared to the rest of the world. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but still not the best either.
Well, when you look at refugees, we do take the fourth highest amount as to be resettled in Australia globally. Fourth biggest. The biggest being, I believe, it's still the US, but that's not per capita. It's just space.
Because they're bigger.
Yeah, they kind of have a bit more space. It's like the US, Canada, UK, Australia have the biggest permanent intake, but treatment of those who do not come through the visa application process in a third country, that's where they falter. For when they use the systems that they have available, so I believe 17,500 places each year to refugees. So that system works well, but it's completely overshadowed by their treatment in other sectors.
You see a lot of, I guess, talk on maybe political commentary where they go, this party wants free and open borders, the illegal immigrants are just going to be flowing through our borders, the boats are just going to be coming non-stop. But I think no one's really for open borders, and we're not turning Australia's border into the Schengen area.
We also have that inbuilt border of being an island. I think that really needs to be remembered in a lot of these policies. People are like, oh, people are going to walk right in. And you're like, where? There is an ocean. And it's like quite a scary ocean.
We have a big drawbridge from here to maybe Syria. So it's a big drawbridge. They're just coming through.
People are always walking across that one. It's an easy journey.
Hey, if they've brought in their Depot bathers, they're allowed to.
Exactly.
No fast fashion.
Absolutely. Oh gosh.
As our podcast is called Glad You Knew, and transitioning back to climate change for one little part, and what shocks me is the environmental deregulation that's going on at the moment, and seeing that we're going to have our koalas extinct by 2050. But what do you think people should take out of what you've discussed about climate change?
Oh, something to take out of it is definitely the importance of people power and the presence of consumers' behaviour in paving that road forward. And that it's not a disempowered system. It is when you have the youths especially calling out, wanting ethical living, basically, wanting a future, wanting fresh air that they'll be able to breathe in the future. When you have that and people moving forward, they can create those consumer buying behaviors that will influence what is produced. And there's also the trend that when people call out for it, businesses have to respond. There's raising of in business practice, even though, yes, a lot of business is going down, deregulation, being able to do whatever they really want. There's been a call from people basically that they want that triple bottom line. They want the 3 Ps. They want people, planet, profit. And that's the move. If people continue that uproar, that protesting that whole idea of really getting to the forefront, saying what they want, and that they want a livelihood that is safe in the future of clean air, forests, not dying from rising sea levels. If they get out and keep that conversation and keep adjusting consumer behavior, that can be achieved. And it's been seen in other parts of the world. You have the EU having to have reports on their sustainability in their business practices. It's law in the EU that has to be a part of their financial records. And there's movements for the rest of the world to follow that. And so that there is a path forward, and there is a path towards more environmentally sustainable living.
Thank you so much, Monique, for your amazing discussion and simplifying that all for our listeners.
Thank you for having me. It's been a very fun chat. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Monique.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Glad You Knew Politics podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast, leave us a rating and a review on what you thought about this week's episode, and any other questions you might have or issues you would like us to cover in future episodes. You can keep up to date with us and the podcast by following us at Glad You Knew on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Links are in the description below.